Steve Jones, thanks so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus. I just want to acknowledge that you filed to run for US Congress and CD1 again, but we still think that you have a valuable perspective here, a broader conservative perspective on the Trump administration's second term. So thanks again for making the time. Now, I want to spend some time talking through some of the federal action in recent months and how it's been impacting New Mexico. Let's start broad, then get into some specifics. What's working in your mind and what is it?
Largely, I think we as a blue state are going to have our difficulties benefiting by even the early days of the Trump administration. So sadly, the things that I'm concerned about in New Mexico, per capita income, the creation of jobs, etc., I don't think there's been that much good achieved, and I worry about the future.
So you mentioned the economy, of course. There have also been quite a few cuts, federal workforce programs, grants. A lot of the driver behind that has been the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. You've had a background in business, and when you spoke with Gwyneth last time on the show, you talked about your experience in logistics, making things run more smoothly. What does that process look like to you, and how would you have advised DOGE if you could?
Well, if I may take you up to a 10,000-foot level on this subject, for 4 years and or more, the various members of the cabinet, the current cabinet, have focused on this as an issue. Now, as I mentioned to her, my number one concern was the financial health in the future of our country vis-a-vis the debt and certainly the spending level. They've been mindful of this. There was a Project 2025, of which one of the major architects of that program is now in the cabinet. So we have, as a 10,000-foot level, a desire to reshape the federal government, reshape it, incorporating a lot of changes. Now, let's get back to your question. How does the spending programs affect reshaping it? Well, if you believe, as I do, that we have to take drastic measures to prevent the bankruptcy of our country, then, like I did back in the oil industry in the late 80s, you have two choices. You can take a gradual approach or you can take a meat cleaver. You will see in the various members of the cabinet a cleaver action. They're going in and they're trying to save the patient by lopping off limbs. Yes, they're getting bone, they're getting sinew, they're getting fat. And all of us who look at that and say, well, that's not exactly an efficient way of evaluating people. And they would be right on that subject. Does the urgency of the situation call for that drastic cut? I happen to believe, as they do, that it has to happen quickly. I don't like it as a person who's much more interested in efficiency and keeping good talent, but it is in fact going to hopefully save the patient.
Okay. Were there any specific cuts that you've seen that you've taken issue with?
Well, I always have a problem with reduction in force, RIF, it's called. RIF touches each and every family member that is in that RIF in a very, very personal and in many ways unforeseeable way. Drastic cuts. People who've spent multiple years working in what they consider to be the benefit of the voters. And yes, I have that as my number one issue, RIF, because good people get thrown out. It's the baby with the bathwater. Good people get thrown out with that later on we're going to regret losing.
What about any cuts that you do agree with? Where do you think is an area that needed attention before this, and you've seen that happen?
Well, the thing which is the third rail in politics, basically all of the entitlements programs, there's only a couple of ways you can approach reduction of corruption and waste in those programs. And that is to go into the actual bowels of it to look at where it is not running efficiently. And I approve of the fact, and I know this doesn't sound well to people who are worried about losing Social Security, but I approve of the cuts that are being evaluated in terms of people who should not be receiving those benefits. Because think of it this way, whatever they receive does not go toward people who should be receiving it. And unfortunately, there's a lot. If you take at face value what we're being told, there is a lot of inefficiency and corruption in the medical programs and Social Security, probably veterans benefits. So I approve of it, even though it's a politically unsavory thing to be doing.
Your comment about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, is there any concern on your part that that's happening with those specific programs? I mean, these are some of our most vulnerable citizens, and there have been reports of people who have legitimately been receiving these benefits, getting caught up at this and having that cut off, and then they have to go through this process of that may or may not yield what they are entitled to.
And this, again, I hope I don't come across to your viewers as being callous, but yeah, that's some of the unintended consequences, clearly. And to each and every person who is rightfully entitled that gets caught up in this, our hearts go out to them. And all of us should be wanting to protect those people. But in terms of a program that is as extensive as this, those innocent victims will, in fact, be penalized.
I want to get to immigration, detainment, deportations. We've seen the headlines in recent months about supposed MS-13 gang members being sent to prison in El Salvador. We know, of course, the man in Missouri, the father with known ties, with no known ties to that or any other gang, was deported there. But none of these people have been giving due process hearings. We saw ICE take 48 people from here in New Mexico with no explanation last month. Are these detainments and deportations being carried out responsibly in your mind?
I want to be careful in my response to you because I think there's a much more calculated administrative purpose behind those than the media have recognized. And that is, let's just say for a moment that what you wanted to do is to get people who are already nervous to say, hey, except for God, that could be me sitting in a Salvador prison. I'm talking about self-deportation, about the massive program where people know they've been determined that they are here illegally. So that media coverage of a single individual has done more to cause self-deportation than the Trump administration. So I think what's happening is that there's a combined set of forces at work here to achieve the goal of trying to get our immigration system, which is admittedly broken, to be repaired. Now, due process. I think the due process side of this is a part of a much, much bigger plan. And that is that, again, in terms of reshaping the federal government, I think we all know that ultimately the executive branch is seeking to get more and more power, more and more control. Many in his administration feel that where we have had failures in our system has been in Congress. The congressional person elected by their district goes to Congress and then works their own ends. So I think what's happening is we're seeing a shift of power away from the congressional branch, the legislative branch, and sadly, I think maybe in the judicial branch. So again, due process is certainly something that we have always hoped for in our process checks and balances. But here we are seeing real time a test of that concept.
Should that be a worry for us?
So,
yeah.
Oh, big time. That's my number one worry. You know, whatever good you think these changes are accomplishing, at the end of the day, you have to worry how much power is being transferred to the executive branch in general and to the president in particular. And I worry about that because we all know that he envies those who have much more authority than our own executive branch has.
So who needs to step up in this situation then? How do we avoid what you're spelling out as what is clearly his roadmap for more power?
Well, I can tell you who is not doing it. They should be, and that is the loyal opposition. The loyal opposition is in such disarray that I'm afraid no matter what they say, no one's going to pay attention. They've cried wolf too much. They're focused on the minuscule, microscopic, and I'm sorry to say, the gentleman who got deported, whether it was right or wrong, everybody's focusing on that, while the other hand is over here doing something that is far, far more potentially detrimental to our country.
President Trump this week issued a memo laying out his intent to send the military to public lands on the southern border. He wants to repel invasions, in his words. And the military announced this week that it was authorized to detain migrants. Is the military a bridge too far for something like this, or do you think the president's actions are appropriate here?
Well, those are two excellent points. Is it a bridge too far? Yes. I think the problem with bringing the military in at this point is we've already established that the people that we hired to do that job are doing an admirable job now. It's well under control. We have record low illegal immigration. I personally have been across the border probably half a dozen times over this last year. It's an orderly flow. There's no anger on the other side of people who are illegally requesting to be admitted. So is the military a sledgehammer in this instance? Yeah, I think so. But back to what is trying to be communicated, and that is that this is going to be an ongoing process. People are going to be selected to be removed from our country. And that, again, is, I believe, a part and parcel of getting the people willingly to self-deport. It could be, I mean, that's pretty scary to me to say I'm going to be confronted with an armed soldier at the border. That certainly would cause me to have second thoughts.
Steve Jones, thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.